I'm not much of a talker. I work as a driver. I mostly drive in the southern states, but I can get a little further afield. December 23, 2012. 10:30 p.m. call. Dispatcher Gus calls. There's a rush order to Oklahoma. No one signs up for it. Customer pays double rate. No wonder, I reply. Who wants to face Christmas 500 miles from home and pick up all the traffic along the way? Dispatcher. It's urgent. You're the last hope. The shipping companies won't deliver until the 5th. The shipment has to be there before Christmas. Why the urgency? And who's going to be there to pick it up? Everyone's probably celebrating Christmas. Dispatcher. These are gifts to the orphanage. The client was raised there. All right, I'll take it. They found Santa Claus, no less. You owe me one. So, December 24, 11:00 p.m. I'm loaded and rushing to Oklahoma City. The kids' matinee had been moved to the evening, and I was there at 8:30 p.m. on December 25. Most of the staff was involved in unloading, including Santa and the person of one of the shelter staff. At 9:00 p.m., I safely left the aforementioned facility. After an hour's drive, my generator failed. It had failed earlier, but I didn't find out about it until an hour later. What is a dead alternator on the gasoline engine? I think it is not necessary to explain. It was -15 outside, taking into account the furious wind -20 or even more. The trees along the road were not much help. Thoughts flashed about what to do. The cold outside is terrible. The car would get cold in 30 minutes, an hour at most. No cars, of course, who would drive on the highways at Christmas. I decided to take the alternator off before the engine cooled down. Got to work, not a lot of choices. There was no sense in going anywhere. It was 5 to 10 miles to the nearest town, which is about 2 to 3 hours on foot. After the generator procedure, I was chilled to the bone. I could feel my insides getting cold. I wouldn't advise anyone to jump or run in such cases either. You'll sweat, then you'll freeze even more. It was as cold in the car as it was outside. In such cases, even the devil would be asked to warm himself. I don't know how much time passed. I was looking hopefully at the frost-covered windshield and the rearview mirror, which I had to clean every 10 minutes. And here was the saving light at the end of the tunnel. No, I didn't die. It was the headlights of a truck. But when I saw what kind of car it was, my astonishment had no end. It was a truck of a very old model. These cars were produced in the 60s. I had only seen such trucks in my childhood about 20 years ago, and what's more, it was new. Hello from the past, I thought. An old man of about 40 to 50 years, with gray hair, as tall as me, in old-fashioned but neat clothes, the kind I only saw at my grandfather's place, came out of the car. I had the impression that both the driver and the car were mistaken about the year, but at that moment I did not care much. I was tired. I had not slept for almost a day, and terribly cold. Another couple of hours, and they would have found me completely frozen. I took the generator and got into the truck. I did not feel any warmer in the car. It was just as cold as mine. The driver was going pretty fast and confidently 50 to 60 miles per hour. I was even surprised that this old lady could accelerate so fast now, although the range of vision is no more than 30 to 40 meters, and the road is very slippery, rolling plus snow fallen from above. A rattling mixture. The strangest thing, despite the unheated cabin, the windows did not sweat, and the man did not even have steam coming out of his mouth, although I was breathing like a locomotive, and I was fine with steam. Said some strange things, like he was on his way to unload at the Ridley Motorcycle Company plant in Oklahoma City, even though it was about 2 years out of existence at the time. Took about 10 or 15 minutes to get to some diner. The man says, "Here we are," and he hands me an old, shabby $10. He said he was in a big hurry, so tell him I'd stop by on way back. I took this relic without too many questions and got out of the car, hoping that the cafe would be warmer. Fortunately, my expectations were met. As I entered, a wave of warmth came over me, which I could feel only on my face so far. The owner of the cafe, an old grandfather, about 60 years old, Native American looking, short, black eyes, which reflected all the sadness of the Injun people, met me with a questioning look. It was useless to try to say something. My chin was frozen. My speech wasn't audible. so I silently passed and sat down at the table. In about 10 to 15 minutes, I felt that I began to thaw, and in another 5 minutes a sharp pain hit my nose, and blood came out. I had frozen my nose. I thought the vessels were frozen and burst, and now they have thawed. The owner silently brought a wet towel, and together we cleaned me up. I was able to speak, so I took the tenner out of my pocket and handed it to Cal. That was the name of the cafe owner, as we found out later, saying, "Old Fox asked me to give you his debt." This time in the eyes of the grandfather could see several feelings at once: fear, amazement, which gradually turned into joy. It's funny to watch a man who manages to experience so many different and contradictory feelings so quickly in such a short time. I learned from Cal's grandfather that Old Fox was a good friend of his who lived about 30 years ago. He told me a lot about his friend, and I guess Grandpa was lonely and needed an interlocutor. I was a bad conversationalist, but a great listener, especially since I had nowhere to hurry, and it was far from dawn. So, the story of Old Fox. He got his nickname because of his gray hair and sly eyes. In 1982, this same Old Fox was working as I did, driving food from Colorado to Oklahoma, that Ridley Motorcycle Company plant, and they gave him a new car, which he was very happy about. He was washing off the new one at Cal's with some friends he'd picked up along the way, and promised to pay them back on the way back. On the way back, he met a bus that was taking kids from a matinee at the orphanage. The road was slippery and the bus ran out onto the oncoming road. The Old Fox decided that the lives of the bus passengers were more important than his own. Bottom line, the bus driver and passengers got away with fright and abrasions, while our hero hugged a tree from a roadside planting for good. I said goodbye to my grandfather. At parting, he said that I strongly resembled his friend. I caught a ride to the nearest auto parts store, changed the brushes on the alternator, and drove toward home. On the way back, I wanted to stop by Grandpa Cal's, but the amazing thing was that I couldn't find a diner. Although I don't suffer from sclerosis or topographical cretinism, and I don't consume any of that stuff. It was night, about 11:00 p.m. I was on my way home from New Jersey from my grandmother's house on the train, very tired, since I had been working very hard helping her. The fatigue was translated into me yawning my whole mouth off every 2 or 3 minutes. I wanted nothing more than to go to bed. The desire for sleep made all my motor skills and reflexes drop drastically, and I think from the outside it looked like I had been drinking too much, but it didn't matter to me. There was no one in my carriage, which I could not say about the others, because as I described above, fatigue suppressed everything and walking back and forth was no longer possible for me. There was about half an hour to go. I had an idea. Maybe I should take a nap anyway at the terminus, which is my stop. The driver's voice yells worse than a loudspeaker, so that I will not be able to sleep. With these thoughts, my eyes closed. It would seem that all should go well, but it was not so. I could not fall asleep because of the strong jolting and humming of the motor. In a couple of minutes, I got tired of it. When I opened my eyes, to my surprise, there was a silhouette of someone sitting on the other side of the car, leaning against the window. The light was too dim. Most of the lamps were not working, so I could not make him out exactly. The strange thing was that the train didn't make any stops, and there was no sound of doors opening. Anything is possible. Maybe it slipped by somehow, or I didn't hear it, I thought, but some sense of danger lodged inside. My eyes closed again. I can't tell exactly how long I lay like that. Then I opened my eyes again, and to my surprise, no one was there. There was laughter in my head. What an overworked man, I thought. Suddenly, behind me, I heard someone's breathing. It was heavy, rough. It was incomparable. Goosebumps ran down my skin. Drowsiness instantly disappeared. My heart raced. Not knowing what to do, I rushed from my seat and ran forward. After a few seconds, I heard someone's footsteps behind me. Their sound was like when wet flippers hit the floor. Fear did not allow me to turn around, and in my head thoughts told me, "Run, run, run." The steps began to accelerate. In confusion, my feet themselves rushed to the toilet, which luckily was open, and when I ran in there, out of the corner of my eye, I saw what caused my fear. I had read and watched a lot of horror stories, but I had never seen anything like this. Here's how I can describe it. A small something about 5 feet tall, in some kind of white garment like a nightgown, head shaped like an oval, narrowed at the bottom. It had eyes, but they seemed rotted out, mouth wide, but not long, no teeth. It frightened me so much that I don't remember what happened next. I came back to my senses after a while. I took a breath, calmed down, and again I put it down to imagination and fatigue, but one thing made me change my mind. Footprints, wet footprints left on the floor of the train, suddenly announced my stop, and I abruptly ran out of the train. This incident will forever remain in my memory. The night before last, around 3 o'clock, I was coming home from the movie theater. I went with my girlfriend to a 1 a.m. showing of a horror movie. The movie was absolutely stupid, boring, and pointless, and I slept through most of it. Something about casting demons out of people, but not the point. After the movie, I dropped her off and headed home myself. The roads were empty and the traffic lights were mostly out of order, so I drove fast, turned the music up, and enjoyed myself. I don't live in the center of town, so to get to my neighborhood I have to drive on a straight road with no buildings on either side. As I drive along this stretch, I see a girl walking leisurely along the side of the road. I noticed at once that she was dressed too lightly, in some kind of a dress, as if she had just come out of a warm room, but there were no constructions nearby. As I drove closer, I was totally freaking out when I saw that she was also barefoot. It was about minus 15 degrees Celsius outside. I thought it was obvious something was wrong, so I decided to find out what was wrong. I stopped next to her, opened the door, and yelled out to her, "Girl, is everything okay? Do you need help?" There was no reaction from her. As she was walking at a leisurely pace, she was still walking. Thinking that maybe it was shock, I got out of the car and, continuing to call her out, approached her from behind. As if she didn't hear me, she kept walking. When I was beside her, I heard her faintly humming, in a rather pleasant voice, some song. At that moment I felt uncomfortable, so I stopped chasing her and stood still, looking at the back of the retreating silhouette. I was about to get back in the car and drive on, but suddenly something woke up in me, as if I felt a rush of courage, and almost said out loud, "Well, we can't leave her here." I moved quickly toward her, caught up with her, and put my hand on her shoulder. "Young lady, let's go to the car. I'll take you where you say. Maybe you should go to the police," I said, and pulling her by the shoulder, I turned her toward me. At that very moment I went numb with horror. Such a state I had never experienced in my life when I saw her face. It was all mangled with horrible huge scars, crudely stitched, unevenly healed. Some were deep and old, some fresh with blood stains. The face was so disfigured that it didn't look like much of a person. My mouth had slid to the side, and one eye was gone, just an empty eye socket, covered in skin. My legs refused to hold me, so I just sat back, keeping my eyes on her mangled face. She took a step toward me, leaned in a little, and said quietly, "He's going to be very angry." I left without asking. At that moment, it seemed to dawn on me that the only right thing to do was to get out of here as quickly as possible, and once I was home, call 911 to explain the situation. I jumped to my feet and rushed to my car, tripped and fell, hitting my foot. I got up and limped to my car. When I opened the door, I turned around, and to my surprise, there was no one in the exact spot where the mutilated girl had just stood. The crazy panic in my head instantly subsided. I froze, standing there with the car keys in my hand. The first thoughts began to emerge, attempts to explain what had happened to me. Was I imagining it? Was it? What nonsense I had just seen, heard, and even felt her beside me. Maybe I was losing my mind. I got in the car, put the key in the ignition with shaking hands, started the engine, and slowly drove off. In vain I had the feeling that I had already experienced all the inexplicable frightening. As I drove away from the place, I glanced in a rearview mirror. She was standing in the same spot, and next to her stood a small, tall, fat man in a gray tracksuit, presumably a man who took her by the hand and began to lead her away toward the curb. I did not feel wild terror, as all this was not happening in my immediate vicinity. When I was looking, I didn't notice that the car started to go to the left and crashed into the guardrail. I was not wearing my seatbelt. The airbag went off, and I lost consciousness. I woke up in the hospital, and it turned out I had a concussion. My parents and my girlfriend came to visit me, and they all asked me what circumstances led to my crash. But I didn't tell anyone. I told them I had fallen asleep at the wheel. The doctor told me to stay overnight. I didn't object, as I am very careful about my health. The night came. I woke up from a terrible cold. I opened my eyes, and next to my bunk stood a small, stout, old man in a gray jacket. I could see his face up close, thick frowning eyebrows, expressive green eyes, a cylindrical old-fashioned hat, thick lips, a small beard. "Who are you?" I said, and winced at the sudden onset of a headache, apparently the aftermath of a concussion. He was silent, scrutinizing my face. Just as I was about to call for a nurse, he made a swift movement in my direction, leaned over and whispered in my ear, "What a beautiful face you have. You must be an obedient boy. If you want to keep it, keep your mouth shut." The horrible smell from his mouth made it clear that this was no dream. I felt a slight prick in my right leg. I passed out. I woke up in my room. A nurse came in and said it was okay to pack. Of course, I told no one about it. Now I'm sitting at home writing this story and thinking about how risky it is, but I cannot not share. I really hope I never see him again.